Okay, I think we'll get started here, and then we'll let people join in. And thank you everyone for joining our April edition of the Dallas Fort Worth Power Platform User Group. I'm excited to have you guys here. We have Ashish Bhatia, who is a product manager on the AI Builder team with Microsoft, joining us today to talk about all the generative AI and Copilot features that are coming in as part of the product. And I'm excited to see what he's got to share. Quick intros. I'm Geeta Silsila. I am an architect with Artist Consulting, a Microsoft partner based out of Dallas, Texas, and enthusiast of all things Azure, AI, Office 365, and of course the business applications as well. I try to blog and share my trials and tribulations with the platform, so feel free to give me a follow or reach out if you have any questions. Always happy to help the best way I can. I also have my colleague who's also a co-founder of the user group, Ben McMahon. I'll let him introduce himself.
Hello, everybody. Yep, Ben McMahon, been with Artists for about 11 years, part of the leadership team, the organization, colleague of Geeta for several of those years, and really excited about the topic today. And I've been following the content you've been putting out on LinkedIn as well. It's very helpful, and maybe if you get a chance, I think that one graphic that you shared just with the progression of coding languages, ending up with where we are today with natural language is fascinating and really speaks to a wide opportunity in the future.
Thank you, Ben. Here's our agenda for the day. We'll kind of go through some intros and recent announcements, just a quick 5 to 10 minute for me to just go through that list there. And then we'll have Ashish go through his session, and then we'll open up the forum for any Q&A. Just a quick highlight on the recent business applications launch event that happened earlier in April. And it's no surprise with all the AI rage in the recent past, even the business applications launch event was focused on generative and responsible AI. And the usage of AI was portrayed in two variants. One is the user copilot, and the other one is the maker copilot. The user copilot is where you use AI as an assistant to help with user productivity. A good example would be having a user copilot in your Power App, where it can talk to your chosen data source, be it Dataverse, for example, or the data backend that your app has been built on, and then you're able to ask questions, and your AI assistant is able to interact with that data and give you responses based on your prompts. The other one is the Maker Copilot. So that is a flavor of an AI assistant that helps makers or developers to build applications faster than ever before. So it helps you with coding suggestions. You can ask how to write expressions or to explain certain expressions. It does a pretty good job of being able to help you get started on that path. Now, if you're interested in learning about the mechanics of these AI models behind the scenes, there was a special session as part of the BizApps launch event hosted by Dr. Walterson. He is the vice president on the AI team for the business applications group at Microsoft. He did give us a deep dive on the tech behind those large language models. And Azure OpenAI large language models and business applications are changing the way people interact. We've been seeing a lot of evolution happening on that end almost every day. So do give that session a try, and I will drop the links shortly where you can take a deeper look at how everyone at your organizations can leverage AI and get into topics like fine-tuning models for any domain-specific languages, or even using retrieval augmented generation for Q&A in bots. And it also does cover GPT for targeted content creation, be it for sales or marketing as such. It's definitely a good short session to watch to get a better understanding of how these LLMs are working behind the scenes. The Microsoft Power Platform release plan for 2023, which is the release wave 1, was also released around the same time frame. It announced a bunch of updates for customers, especially covering features that are prepared for releases, or even new features that are upcoming in the period of April to September 2023. So there's a link for that itself. There's a PDF that you can download, or there's even a online version of it that you can go through based on the area or tool that you're specifically interested in. Next up is just talking about how Azure OpenAI models are, have been improving, or the team has been doing a great work of improving those models, specifically around the Power Automate exposure with Azure OpenAI models. In October of 2022, Microsoft released the Describe It to Design It feature that you can use to write a simple description or a prompt where you can have AI generate a cloud flow just based on the description that you provide, and it does it pretty instantly. And this was made possible with the model behind the scenes that Microsoft refers to as NL2 Flow. Internally, that's the name that they call it. And this model learns the correspondence between the language prompts and the flow, and it's able to eventually generate a new flow in response to your natural language prompt. Since the release, they've been dramatically working on improving the experience of building those flows by reducing the creation of the flow to be half the time that it used to take. Now, one thing to note is for privacy reasons, Microsoft does not, by default, get access to those phrases that you type in or the details that you provide to the AI assistant or to your copilot to generate those flows. But it's an opt-in feature, so administrators can opt in to share the data with Microsoft, so that way they can improve those models. And so this opted-in data will help them identify which phrases have the lowest rate of successful suggestions and acceptance. And then with that data, they're able to generate more sample flows targeted, to the specific areas based on the natural language prompts, and then use that sample data to further fine-tune those models. And so there have been several rounds of model improvements. There's the NL2 Flow 003, which was released in November, and then the NL2 Flow 004, which was released earlier in January. And then each of those models have led to those metrics that we have there. So any between the NL2 Flow 002 and 003 version, there has been an increase in the flow acceptance rate by that certain percentage. And then similarly, between 003 and 004, you do see that there's been a more higher percentage of successful suggestions. So this type of fine-tuning is only possible if you have more people trying out the feature, and then also giving back to Microsoft, where you can provide that feedback back and allow them to have that data so they can fine-tune the models to get better. This next announcement is exciting news for pro devs. If you hear our pro devs, you're now able to create a custom connector for your web APIs from Visual Studio. So Visual Studio 2022 preview now allows Power Platform to be a connected service. So a code-first developer can now create an API and connector just from within your Visual Studio interface. So that visual that you see on the left shows you how you can add Power Platform as a service dependency, and you're able to update an existing custom connector or create a new one from that API. And now you can also use Power Apps to run, to use that API that you built while it's running on your local environment. So what that means is, just look at the visual at the bottom right corner. You'll notice that you're now able to debug your custom connector real time. So you're able to have that running locally on your machine, and then you're able to connect and build an app, maybe a mobile app that uses the connector, and then you're able to debug in real time and also, hard reload if you need to. So that's very exciting news, so that, you're now able to put forth your pro code skills and be able to debug and, just incrementally have updates going on as you're making changes to your connector. This next announcement here is the general availability of a seamless experience that enables your makers to see variables and collections directly in line within your Canvas Studio, which is the designer. So you do have a pane on the left rail in your app designer, which now has the variables panel, and then it also has collections located on the same panel. You're able to look at global variables, context variables, component variables, and collections. And specifically with collections, you're able to select a collection and then click on View Table, and you're able to see all the content for that table. So this is now making it very easy to define and interact with variables and collections in real time while you're designing your app. Now, this is already rolled out to a bunch of tenants, so I'm seeing it on my tenant. So you might already have it, so do check that out. The last announcement that I have here is the drop shadow for containers. So very recently, if you drop a container in your Canvas app, specifically being on an authoring version that I have there, that's the authoring version you have to be on to be able to see this feature light up. But once you do that and you drop a vertical or a horizontal container, you now have a new property available called the drop shadow. So now you don't have to work with HTML controls and come up with HTML content to create all the border radius and box shadows. You now have that feature built in as part of your connectors, and it's become much more intuitive and more productive to start building more modern looking apps. So do check that out. That's the version number that you'd have to be in when you're building your Power App. Did have a couple of links here, so I'll drop the links in the chat for you all to go take a look at. Just a quick call out on a few events that are happening. We have Microsoft Build coming up in May, 23rd to 25th. It's a hybrid event. I mean, there's an online version and there's also an in-person version. So you are able to register for free and attend the event online. And then there's also the Power Platform conference. This event is sponsored by Microsoft and it's held in person in Vegas the week of October 1 to 6, where 3 to 5 are the conference days, and then 1 and 6 are workshop days. So be sure to register for that if you're interested in networking with peers in the space and also being able to meet with product teams and subject matter experts who have some really cool sessions out there. All right. So today we have Ashish, who is the product manager on the AI Builder team with Microsoft, and he frequently shares his expertise and learnings on the AI and machine learning models on social platforms. So I'll drop a link to his LinkedIn profile so you can follow him. He is on a mission to democratize no-code AI solutions, making intelligent technology accessible to everyone. And Ashish, we can't wait to see what you've got for us. It's all yours.
Thank you, Geeta. Hey everyone, thanks for the opportunity to talk to you folks. If the video starts to lag, let me know. I'll turn it off. My machine has been running on overdrive today. So I did a previous session, they had issues, so we turned off the camera and it worked fine. Let me share my screen and we get started. So I'm totally flexible. We can navigate the session. It's pretty small group, so we can move in any direction. But what I really thought of talking was similar to a talk that I did at MVP Summit, but mostly talking about how the AI trends are changing the landscape, especially for citizen developers. And then talk a little bit about prompt engineering. Last night also I was reading about prompt engineering, so again, topic fresh on my mind. And so I would love to talk a little bit about that and then dive into some demos and show what we can do on the platform, and then maybe take questions as well, again, whichever direction we want to take it. Let's get started. I'm just myself, I'm product manager in the AI Builder team, as Geeta said. I have been an AI product manager for about 9 years in Microsoft. Before joining AI Builder, I was with various other teams on the industry AI side, and then Azure side of things. I worked a little bit with Azure machine learning team as well, is a partner team of theirs, and we've always worked with customers on their AI problems, more so on the custom AI side of things, where we're building custom models for customers, and which is fine-tuned for their scenarios. So coming into the no-code, low-code world has been super interesting because again, just more usable, more people can engage with this. It lowers the bar for entry, I feel. And with all the large language models coming in, it almost is creating a parity between the two sides of things, right? So I, again, just love that transition myself. So then let's dive in. We talk a lot within the Power Platform business application team that the age of AI is here. Again, you'll see a similar theme on a bunch of slides, but AI, at least just from my own vantage, it's center of everything. because again, I'm hooked onto channels and conversations, and just my kind of surface area is AI, so I probably tend to hear a lot more, but I'm listening into conversations when we are talking to friends and or dinners as well. People are starting to talk about AI, and if not AI, at least ChatGPT. So the conversation is leaning towards just this world that was very focused space for data scientists a while ago, but it's kind of coming into our common narrative and vernacular as well, I feel. So super interesting. What's causing this change is the foundation models.
Yeah,
And they, yes.
sorry to stop you. I do think there's a lag, maybe because of your video turned on. Yeah, I was just gonna ask you to turn that off. We'll see if that's better. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. So yeah, foundation models are changing what's possible with AI. It is paramount, right, to understand how the models are built and fine-tuned and all of that. But I feel it's even more important to understand what you can do with them. And just, I think that space is becoming wider and just more open in terms of how people are able to interact with these models, right? Let's detail a little bit on the foundation models. What are they and what do they do, right? So foundation models are, I mean, you've seen DALI and OpenAI models, GPT models. They are built on very large amount of data that creates this generalization models that they can be applied in more than one scenario. So far, again, my previous life has been, we've been building AI models which are specific, task specific. You want to classify can of one soda company versus can of another soda company. You bring in a ton of data of those cans placed on shelves in different orientation. Somebody is going to manually annotate that data and you build the model. And that model is just good for that purpose, right? It cannot classify anything else, right? So that has been the domain that we have been living in. The few things with that domain. You're building specific models that are fit for just one purpose and they can do one thing, but you also spend a lot of time collecting all of that data, annotating data, and then building data. And the problem with that is sometimes just the data is not available to build a credible enough model that can work well in the real world. Second problem is sometimes you build that model and you don't know how to consume it because, hey, this was built by a data science team. They used maybe R or Python or something else to build in, and this engineering team, which kind of productizes everything, is working in C# in a different environment and all of that. And how do you kind of bring this over, right? All of those kind of problems. Sometimes just the AI just isn't good enough that you can build credible production level workloads with it. Or just the AI took too much time that everybody just lost interest, right? There's several reasons why the traditional way of building data science or just models, I would say, um, wasn't leaning or leading towards success, right? I'm not saying that that's not the case anymore and all problems are solved and people are not building specific models. There's very good reason to build specific model in certain cases, and ton of people are still doing it. So just the data science job is not going away anywhere. But there's another kind of sheriff in the town, right? There's another set of models in the town which are general purpose, right? So these foundation models are general purpose. They can do more than one task. Sometimes they're multimodal, that they can work with different dimensions of data. So text data, image data, maybe even video data at some point of time. They're also multi-purpose in the sense, sure, you can ask it to do multiple things, but you can ask the same model to do a couple of things at the same time, right? So it can even do that. So again, from my standpoint, like this is not an incremental shift, right? Incremental shift is, hey, my model was performing 80% on some dimension, and now I have made it better and it performs 98%. Right? It's not that, it's a step increment. It's a huge jump in just what these models are and what they can do with it, right? And I always say, what you see and what you get to play with, there is probably a 10x better model which is under testing in one of these large entities, or whoever is building the large language models, and then probably even a better model, more powerful, more optimized model which is under development, right? So the scale of growth has been phenomenal. I was just talking to somebody earlier today, and I was like, I'm surprised that when I'm saying this, that text Da Vinci model feels like from a different age when you compare it with a ChatGPT model, which is the turbo model, or then GPT-4 model. And that previous model was available to us like a few months ago, right? That was the state of the art like just a few months ago. And it feels like it's from a different age. So the scale at which things are moving is just super fast. And I want people to acknowledge that, just understand. So when they are building point of views about, can this solve my problem? Maybe it doesn't today, and don't give up on the AI capability that is existing today to make that determination, because maybe in 6 months time, it's so far along that it just knocks that scenario out of park, right? So I wouldn't bet against AI at this point in time in that sense. Also, it is going to fundamentally change, I would say, everything. My cousin, he's a director. He directs movies and ad films and things like that. And I was sharing over the weekend just some of the tech that we have been seeing on LinkedIn and Twitter and everywhere else, where with just a language prompt, you're able to develop videos, and powerful videos, which would otherwise have needed teams of people to come along and solve, right? So I don't know if you folks have seen this technology called NERF, where you can take static images from different vantage point, and the NERF model can come and stitch everything up in a video as if it feels like it's a drone footage going around the object of interest, or whatever you're trying to get to. And it's really, really powerful. The reason I sent it to him was he builds these ad campaigns and videos and just professionally developed stuff, which uses a lot of fancy camera technology, and this just changes the game how they build stuff, right? It changes how creators are building things, amount of innovation that they can bring on. Just another tool in your arsenal, right, to get stuff done and move faster. So that's why I feel, right, the technology is going to touch every dimension of the way we think about work, and just super fascinating, right, the times that we are living in right now. So again, seismic shift. Software was eating the world a few months ago, almost like 6 months ago. That was the thing, that software changes how we experience anything and everything, right? I want to order pizza tonight. I can order it on my phone. I want to talk to somebody. There is probably a FaceTime-like experience that will get me closer to that person, right, who I might not have met for a long, long time. So software is just changing how we interact with our environment, our ecosystem, and people around us. And then AI is going to change how software is built, how software is delivered, how software is consumed, how our experiences shape up in the future, right? So AI will be the driving force that will fundamentally change how we think about software. So again, just a few thoughts on that, right? If you look back kind of the memory lane, not Power Platform, but just platforms, right? There existed a time where everything was on-prem and on large machines and servers in on-prem scenario. That world, I mean, if you imagine, go back during that time, right? It was such a disconnected world. And I feel cloud just created that openness where you could connect, you could be on one version, everybody could be on one version. Otherwise, delivering software in that time was you're shipping CDs or DVDs, and you have X amount of versions to manage from just a software management standpoint. And cloud fundamentally changed how we produce software, how we build software. You're not running a year-long software development cycle. You can release every week or month, if you will, right? So that just fundamentally changed how people were allocating resources, how people were building things. Very and with each shift, we will see your strengths become your liability, I feel, a little bit. So if you think or imagine a company which has this large deployment of SQL Server, Windows servers on-prem, right? If you have that kind of an asset and the rest of the world is quickly moving towards cloud, that asset, that advantage that you had over your competitors, that kind of becomes your liability. You need to get rid of all of that to move to cloud, right? So we need to see these shifts early and make kind of changes or adopt or go along or even leapfrog, because otherwise your advantage can become your liability, right? So just something to remember. And similar exchange we saw or shift we saw during the PC and the mobile world, right? A lot of the largest of the companies that you imagine and take for granted today, I mean, imagine them in a PC non-mobile world, right? What those experiences would look like. Just the experience of being able to take a picture and share it right away with your social media and just your network. That itself was, you were taking pictures on bulky cameras, bringing them on your PC, downloading, and then at some point of time figuring out how to share stuff, right? A lot of those fundamental experiences that we take for granted just did not exist, right? A lot of companies, Airbnbs of the world and Grubhubs of the world, right? Lyft and Ubers of the world, they would not have existed if that platform shift had not happened. Right? There's going to be a similar platform shift with AI, and you will see that AI agents will become just pervasive, right, in all dimensions of our life, right? And this is not your previous age of Siri or Cortana or Alexa, right? This is super smart. This is something that you can reason over things, you can ideate, you can have a human-like conversation, meaningful conversations as well, right? But we should always remember that it's an agent, right? It has limited agency. And again, we should not personify it as a person, and just keep that in mind, because I feel a lot of times we get carried away and kind of think of that as a person. We, again, as people developing things, we should keep that in mind, that we always keep humans at the center of that decision making, which I feel is super important, right? It's an assistive tool, and we build it like that. I mean, you'll see all the Copilot conversation that we have. We build it like that humans have the agency over things, whereas AI is your assistant, which can lead you and make you faster and provide you all the efficiencies that you need. But you will see AI just seep into all aspects of our work life and even personal life at some point of time, right? So just fascinating to see all the development. Gartner says by 2025, 75% of new application development will happen in low code, in no code space. And I feel Power Platform is just such a nice place to be in right now, because again, we're that no code platform, at least from Microsoft's standpoint. And with AI coming in, doubling down on AI, you will see that acceleration will even become faster. And I feel in my mind, it just creates a huge parity for citizen developers, because all of this cool stuff that we see today, right? I mean, this was like almost, you would have a step shift between what pro developers can use versus what citizen developers can use, almost like a year of lag, right? What was out there available to pro developers versus citizen developers. That is just disappearing, I feel. And in fact, citizen developers have advantage, because a lot of these tools are just beautifully integrated into one another. If you need to provision a data processing workflow, you kind of call some Power Automate flow, which can do that for you, integrate it into your app, and you're good to go. You would have needed kind of army or teams of people to get done, and that takes generally a long time, right? So I feel with just low code, that parity is available or becoming increasingly important, and just AI seeping into it will just make this development even more faster. And then Gartner also says by 2025, 10% of the data, world data, will be generated by AI. That is just super fascinating. Every time I see this, I'm surprised. Like, imagine 10% of world data. That's a lot of data. And if that data is coming from generative AI, how much data we are creating using generative AI, and also kind of think about, kind of humbles me to think about the fact that all these large language models and image models and speech models that we talk about as foundation models these days, they were all trained on a lot of data that humanity has created over all these years, right? What does it mean for these models when a large chunk of our data will be generated by AI, right? Then AI-based data is then you're training over AI generated data. What does that mean, right? I mean, it's just super fascinating to think about, and scary in that sense as well, right? How do we make sure there is we avoid hallucination, provenance, and all of that, right? So just interesting research space to be in right now, I feel. By again, year from then, right, 2026, 85% of enterprises, according to IDC, will be using some form of human and AI expertise working together in tandem to get their day-to-day job done. And would lead to 25% productivity. This is just, again, a super fascinating number. 85% is a huge, huge number. I see in my day myself that I end up using just all the GPT models that we talk about generally a lot more in my day-to-day work, whether it's kind of ideating on, hey, what are the poll questions that I should ask based on this conversation to my audience, or hey, can you help me synthesize this article, and what are the kind of key takeaway? I don't have time to go through all of this article, or this new research paper came out. What is the kind of biggest points that I should know about, right? A lot of that that interaction with it feels like an interaction with an intelligent assistant that otherwise wasn't there, right? I mean, you have to be an executive to have an assistant go do stuff for you, right? But everybody can afford that now is just super interesting, and just saves a ton of time and keeps me well informed. And again, I can get more done in my day, I feel. And I feel this is just going to become this will become part of everybody's experience over a period of time, and in meaningful ways, I feel. Also, even with the work that we are doing on the Copilot side, it's getting, again, ingested into every aspect of, let's say, a Power Platform or M365, right? So you will have some form of AI assisted technology in all these things, right? Whether you're building a PowerPoint or reasoning over data and Power BI and things like that, right? So again, a lot of our product will have that human AI interaction as well. Any questions? I will pivot and talk a little bit about prompt engineering, then maybe do some demos as well.
So feel free to
unmute and ask the question
or drop
or
it
drop
in
it in
chat.
chat.
Let me open chat as well so I can keep track if people have questions there. Cool. We'll keep going. If again, anytime you have questions, just raise your hand, drop it in chat. Happy to answer. It's just a very small group, easy to manage that conversation, keep it fluid. Prompt engineering, again, just a new programming language. And again, I think Ben mentioned I dropped this picture a few days or maybe a week or so ago, and can just how I, in my own lifetime, in my own experiences, see the change in program. When I was in school, I started, I think, just in middle school kind of thing. I started playing around with BASIC and maybe C, a little bit later C as well, and then assembly as well. And it was fascinating because you could get stuff done. You don't know what is the art of the possible, like 20 years down the line or something. But in that moment, that felt like just so much empowering. You can get machine to do something for you, add 2 numbers for you. But again, you need to know, again, if you're writing assembly, just what is the hardware architecture, right? Or if you're working in C, you're dealing with pointers and stuff like that. So you need to intimately know that programming language, and it feels like an alien language, a new language, right? And we did courses to learn that language over time to build something. And then as we moved on, higher kind of dimension language came along, C#, C++, with its object orientation, Python, stuff like now, where again, you can pull in libraries of things. You can build on other people's work and can get more done, which again, move the agenda of being able to get stuff done with machines and computers further along. And just again, super empowering even in that time frame, right? But imagine like a world where you could just talk to the machine. You can, in your own natural language, the barrier that it lowers for everybody to be able to interact and get stuff done is going to be fundamentally changing how we have leveraged computers in past. And just, I personally feel that's super powerful. Also, I think just roles are changing as well because of that, right? From specialist roles where people are C programmers or Java programmers and just super passionate about it, plugged into their community, right? It's going into a place where we're becoming more generalists, right? If you have a creative thought, you can build it. You don't have to know a specific language or be comfortable with the tool to get it done anymore, right? I mean, I feel we are going to become, I've used this word, I forgot now, like creative builders of future. As a product manager, I don't program anymore, and for a long period of time I wrote code, right? I can't do that anymore in any comprehensive way anymore. But I'm not short of ideas, right? I always have creative ideas of, hey, if this was possible, then I can do this task much faster. Or can I bring these 2-3 things together and I can make a compelling app, right? Whether it's creating UX for it or graphics for it and whatnot, right? With these new AI tools, whether you're trying to get some interesting picture for your landing page in a website, you could go to Stable Diffusion, you could go to DALL-E, and you could create stuff like that, right? So the creative generalists, right? I feel they'll thrive, and people who have just creative ideas will thrive in this world because they can get more done. You're not limited to your skills, right? I'm also I was thinking of writing something about human augmentation of human skills with AI, right? So if you think maybe you're creative at writing, you work with language a lot and you have a good grasp over it, right? But you're not so much, you're not so good at working with images, or you're not creative with images, right? With a lot of this tech, that kind of lowers the barrier for you, that you're working great with language, you can get stuff done with images, and you can make more compelling write-ups, blogs, websites, and whatnot, right? So I feel it just is a huge enabler in that sense. So just very quickly, I mean, I think this is stuff that people know, but just to as a refresher, right? What is a prompt? Prompt is the instruction that we give to the model, and it's all natural language, which is great. But again, there are some semantics in a prompt, right? There is an instruction part of it, right, which tells the model what to do. There is a context part of it, like what is the subject, what is the data that I'm working with. And then there is another component called system prompt. And you've seen with some of the newer models, the turbo models, the GPT-4 models, that even within Azure OpenAI, we've started to open up system prompts, right? I mean, system prompts were these hidden meta prompt kind of things which you didn't have access to, and everybody saw that Bing's system prompt was kind of leaked, or meta prompt was leaked. So it helps you orient or steer the model in a given direction, define guardrails, constraints, and things like that. But as a business, as somebody who's creating stuff, you might want to define meta prompt or system prompt as well, and inform the model or steer the model. But on a very regular basis, you are instructing the model to get a job done. You're giving it a task or a context that, hey, do this on top of this data for me. Example of instruction would be, for example, hey, create a response based on this customer email, respond it in a given tone, restate the problem, and promise an early redressal of the problem. So I'm telling the model that, hey, create me an email response with these dimensions in your mind. So whenever you're crafting a response, stay within the lane, do these things, or think about these things as you're or drafting response. This is something that you might tell a human assistant as well, right? Think of yourself as an executive. A few years ago, and you're asking your assistant to write a letter to some request that has come along, and you're generally telling them an overall kind of pitch that you want them to write, but then you're also saying, hey, this should be tone, here is how you should write, and refer to this previous letter that you might have written, and things like that. Context is, hey, what is the subject that I'm working with? What is the data that I'm working with? What article am I summarizing? What email I'm kind of trying to draw action points from, and things like that, right? So that this is mostly always the variable part. And instruction, again, instructions can change based on what you want to get done from the model. And then the system prompt is where you're giving it a persona, and we've seen models work well when you give it a persona, because some of these entities, they understand, right? When you say, hey, you are a therapist and you're helping your subject or your human do this, right? The model understands the notion of what the therapist does, right? Or you are an instructor teaching math to kids, or you could tell like what grade level as well. That steers the model in a direction where again, it can better serve you, it can better respond to you, right? So it's, again, system prompts are super important as well. What makes a good prompt? Again, we've seen models do generally well, but sometimes in an organizational context, when you're building an automation or an app, you want more predictability in your answers, right? These are non-deterministic models, right? If you ask the same question, you might not get always the same answer, right? But if that's the situation, how do you bring predictability in your response? Because as humans, we're used to working with structured code where you've defined a function, it always does the same thing. You give it an input and it'll produce some output, right? These are non-deterministic because predicting the next token. So you want to give it a little bit more structure. Sometimes you want to shape the output of this response that is generated. Sometimes you want to give it constraints. You can define tone and size of the text that it generates, right? So things like that. Those are good additions to the model, and they help a lot, I feel. Learning by example. Sometimes you will see that just model doesn't get what you're asking it to do, and it's not producing what you want it to do. So there are terms like, oops, I think I lost the example somehow. But I'll show you when we do the demo. But sometimes we do things like few shot training, one shot training. What does that mean? It means giving the model a high value example or high quality example, right? And saying, hey, if this was my prompt and this was my data, here is how I would have produced the output, right? That becomes a great example for the model to take that and then try to produce the output like that. So if you give it one example, it's generally called one-shot training. If you give it a few examples, it's called few-shot training, right? So again, this helps steer the model in just the right direction. Also, is helpful for rapid development. You can quickly iterate with a few examples and see if that model kind of gets you to the right place. Few other things before we jump on, do some demos. Fine tuning and RAG. I think Geeta mentioned this in the beginning, right? Retrieval augmented generation, right? What is RAG? So we'll touch a little bit upon that. So fine tuning is when you want to retrain the model and you want it to do certain tasks for you. This was how we had worked with AI models in past, that you have sometimes transfer learning as well is the word used, that there is a base model that is great for some task. It could be an ImageNet model working with images, and you want it to do specific things. So you're bringing a new data set and you're retraining the model. Retraining a large language model, again, the way we have been fine-tuned in our own brain, right? Then when you want to get the model to behave better with your data, work better with your domain, relate to you more, right? We constantly say, hey, fine-tune, retrain the model, right? But retraining a large language model is a involved process because it's you need to collate all the data that you need to bring to it. Same traditional data science problem, you need to annotate and train the model, right? It's expensive to train a large language model, right? You need also a different kind of skills who know what they're doing, what parameters they're optimizing, right? So again, it's an involved process, and you want to be sure when you want to do that, right? A lot of times, so before I go there, sometimes retraining can get you better results, sometimes it can't, right? Sometimes the model loses its knowledge of the world. It depends on how you're retraining it, right? You can obviously give it a new data set and retrain it, works well because now it knows that data set and the domain and all of that, right? Excuse me. Sometimes you're losing some of the goodness that the model has acquired through generalization, right? And you want to preserve that as well, right? So that can happen as well. So those are things that we should keep in mind. With retrieval augmented generation, we're not fine-tuning any model, we're not retraining it. We are just, excuse me. We're just giving it a data set to ground itself. We are telling it that, hey, I have all the information that you need to be able to produce this answer. Here is in this data set. All you need to do is search for the right token, right context, and pull that out and ground your response with that. Bing is a good example. When you search something in Bing, it takes your intent, it translates it into, hey, what is the search that I want to perform for this question that I'm being asked? Goes, looks up the model from the web, and then ranks them and gives the right top articles back to the model and say, hey, ground your response based on this article, or somewhere in this article is the response that this user is looking for. So that is great when you want to adapt the model to your domain, your data, your knowledge base, right? You have customer response queries and what you have responded to them for past several years, and you want your model to act as you, as your agent to respond to customer queries. You can bring that database along, create a, again, cognitive search kind of an architecture, or semantic search kind of an architecture, where based on the intent, it can go pull the right articles, give it back to your large language model, and you can now produce just human-like or reference that past data and create very realistic outputs. The benefit of it is, again, just it's cost effective. Low code, no code skills will take you far in this. You're not fine tuning the model, you're just using some kind of semantic search. A lot of times we'll just obfuscate all of that for you and would be available off the bat, right? So there's a lot of work that's happening in this area on how to ground the data with enterprise, or how to ground the large language model with enterprise data. And we'll see a lot of activity in this space. Cool. So just very quickly before we jump on to some demos, AI Builder, again, people are familiar with it, but just this is the no-code AI layer in the Power Platform. It's a combination of multiple models which are predefined or custom, and then it's also deeply integrated into Power Platform, which is apps and automate. We've added the GPT action or OpenAI model into this, so we'll see a bunch of it. Again, we talked about lowering the barrier for cutting edge, so I'll skip that part. Again, the way you interact with it is you just instruct the model and get stuff done. So we'll see it in action. Just one thing is, if you look at the previous models, they were like binary. They were pre-built either, so it's a pre-built model, you can't do anything about it. You instruct it and gives you, or not instruct it, but you give it an input and produces an output. You can't do much about it because it's pre-built. Or there is a custom model where you bring your data and you fine tune. Again, you're just bringing your small set of data and you build your custom model, and that's the beauty of AI Builder, but you're still building something custom there. With this, it's kind of a hybrid. It's a pre-built model. You can't change the model, but you can instruct it to do different things. So just think about that, right, as a differentiator between the existing paradigm that existed. All of this goodness is coming to Power Automate Desktop as well. So for the first time, we're integrating AI Builder in Power Automate Desktop, and just this model is the very first model that will land there. So that's just great goodness for all the desktop RPA kind of scenarios that some of the business scenarios that we are seeing is around, again, automation of customer service, a lot of activity here, information extraction, summarization. We'll see some examples of that in our demo as well. Sentiment analysis, text classification and stuff. But again, I always say our imagination is our limit with this model, and you can do so much more, I feel. With that, again, I'll pause and see if people have questions. Otherwise, I will jump in and show some demos and maybe take questions later on then.
No questions on the chat, but if anybody has any questions.
So this, yeah, again, feel free to come off mute if you have questions. Otherwise, I'll keep going. If you have access or if you've been approved for the OpenAI model in Power Automate, you should see something like this new tile, Azure OpenAI tile, which says create text, answer questions, summarize. So it's kind of stating that you can do multiple things with it. So this will light up for you. If not, just feel free to request access. Also, it's in gated preview, so that's why, again, we have a form that we're asking people to fill. So when you have this model open, you'll see a very simplified prompt engineering interface, and we've put a lot of thought kind of building this. That our persona always kind of drives our decision making. That this is a citizen developer. They might not know what a temperature or a top P might mean that you otherwise see in playground experience of Azure OpenAI or even OpenAI. So we've simplified in that sense that we've created this paradigm of instruction and response. You ask a question, you get a response. If you don't like the response, you change the question, right? It's almost like working with a person, working with an intelligent entity. You're asking a question. If you're not getting the right answer, then you change the conversation, or you not change the conversation, but you tweak your conversation and then try to get to the right answer. We've also populated with some templates, just predefined things. You can see collection of the previous slide that we had, all those scenarios that we saw there. We've given a starting point, but remember, these are not the only things that you can do it. You can pick a template and you can run with it. You can change it. You can totally get rid of this and craft your own thing, right? So those things are possible as well. So let's see what we want to do. Let's do a couple of experiments here, and then I'll go to Power Automate and do a few things. So for example, if you pick summarization as a scenario, right? So we can easily bring in. So one of the things I mentioned prompt engineering, right? And I've played around with it as well, that the model works well. Actually, it produces better results if you have instruction and then the context text. You could do otherwise as well. You could give it a context text and then you can give your instruction. I've done that a ton of times. Like I will paste an article and say, hey, summarize this, and then I'll ask questions on top of it. It works well that way as well. But a lot of time when it is not multi-turn, it's just like this is not a multi-turn conversation. By multi-turn, I mean you can follow up with the model and ask more questions. So you ask a question, you're not getting the right answer. You can go back and change that question, improve that question, or add to that question. You can get a different response. So it's slightly different. This is not multimodal. ChatGPT is an example of, sorry, multimodal. I said ChatGPT is an example of multi-turn conversation. This is like a question and a response, question and a response. The way to think about it, and I use this example a lot, is if you remember the movie 50 First Dates, right? the girl used to forget her experiences every day when she kind of wakes up, right? So the boyfriend records the entire day and replays it in the morning, and then takes the footage of that entire day and kind of crystallizes it, adds it to all the existing experience, and that becomes her kind of long-term memory. She had no long-term memory, right? So that is the kind of scenario. You don't have a session with the model. You don't have a memory with the model, not yet, right? So every time you give it an instruction, it is a net new instruction. And if you want to preserve some of the conversation from past, you need to pack all of that together in the new conversation and send it back, right? So that's what ChatGPT does as well, that if you ask a question, and gives you an answer, you ask another question, it is taking all that previous conversation, packing the new answer, new question, sending it back to the model, and that's how it produces this conversation-like experience, right? So just some context on how that magic is done. So in this case, we will drop, let's say, an email, and we are asking the model to summarize this email for me, and it should produce an output, which is a summary, right? And it's trying to do is just best job that it can do to create a summary, and we can tweak some of this, right? So in this case, we are saying, hey, summarize the text in 2 paragraphs, less than 2 paragraphs, right, without adding new information. So why is that last piece more important, right? The last piece is so important because we are saying, hey, stay within the lane, use this text that I'm giving you, and don't add any additional information, because we know that sometimes the model hallucinates, right? I use this term again, that think of it as a happy puppy, right? Who's trying to please you and will do the things you want it to do, right, in order to get that reward. So the model kind of tries to do that as well. It tries to do whatever it can to kind of make you happy. And in that scenario, it will hallucinate and build things if it doesn't know. So we're saying, hey, generate me a summary, stay true to this information, don't kind of add anything additional. I can come back and say, hey, summarize the same thing for me, but I want a different looking output. I can say, hey, give me the same thing, give it to me as a set of bullet points, right? So it should refactor its output, change its output, and create a new output for me. And it tries to generate that. I can come back and say, hey, that was great, but I would also want you to identify owners and action points for those owners. So I can add to it, and it starts with an produce some new output. So it's saying, hey, here is the summary, and here are all the summarized points from this email. And then it'll start to generate actions and owners. And remember, this is again just non-deterministic machine, so it takes a little bit of experimentation. There's nothing I don't know every time I say this it will produce the same output. Not the case always, right? So it can go off the rail, and the job of the prompt engineer, job of the maker, is to give enough context to the model, frame your questions such that it gives you similar or same response every time, right? So you pack as much information, as much context as possible to bring the right output. We talked a little bit about the few shot training, for example, earlier, right? So let's take that as an example. So if I replace this with this, another example where we are saying, hey, identify sentiment of the text below and rate it as good, bad, average, or average, right? And I'm telling it, hey, here's an example of good, here's an example of bad, here's an example of average, and I've given it another set of text, right? So it comes out and says, this is good. I can come back and say, hey, I want to change the format a little bit, right? And I want to say, hey, sentiment is, I'm just giving it examples of how I want my output to be. That will change the, hopefully it will change the output of what it produces for me. And so it gets that clue that, hey, the moment you add a sentiment in your example output, you actually want the output to be structured like this. So you can change the output by giving it examples as well. I could have, I just cooked up this example to show how few shot training works, but we can get crafty. We can probably, I mean, maybe it is just good enough if we remove this, right? It might still produce the right output or the same output. Let's see, I mean, that again, we are playing around with it right now, so we don't know. So that's good, right? I can also say, hey, I want you to call out. We try and get to the same output that we produced earlier. Maybe cut and paste here. No, it will not work it that way. Okay, maybe I can say output. So I'm just free ranging here, so I don't know. There's not a cooked up thing, right? So we'll see how it comes out. We're experimenting how to build our prompts, right? So let's say this, would it produce the? Still is not doing that. Let me see. Sometimes it works good with capitalization as well. I'm still not doing it. Okay, what I really wanted it to be able to say sentiment : good, right? But it's not doing that. So maybe there's some other way that I would have to think about it. So again, this is the art of prompt engineering, that you iterate, you try a few things, right? And you're trying to steer the model to get you to the output that you want. Just that is the art, right? I think in one of the videos I mentioned is the dark art, right? This is what we are playing around with it. So this is all your experimentation area. In Explore, you're playing around with the tool and you're building your prompts. And when you're happy with your prompt, you can say, hey, I want to use it in a flow, I want to use it in an app. This is not where you're creating the value, you're creating your prompt here, you're experimenting with your prompt, and this interface gives you a good quick way to experiment with stuff. But you go to Power Automate or Power Apps to kind of build that value with the GPT model, right? So if we, and these are not like crafty examples, I've just thrown things in there. So if we look at this example, for example, here, so quick question from Vinay is, how do I get Azure OpenAI access? Is there a request form getting? Yes, I'll drop a link. I think it's in the presentation as well, but I'll drop the link for you.
Yeah, so my question was, we are approved at the Azure level. Some of my colleagues who share the Azure tenant, they've been doing some POCs and pilots with OpenAI.
Okay.
But when I go to my Power Platform environment, I don't see the card for, under AI Builder, the card with OpenAI.
Correct. So those are different things. Remember, Azure OpenAI, and I feel the name is misleading and confusing people, and we're thinking of fixing it as well. Azure OpenAI is an Azure level service where you're dealing with subscriptions and things like that. So you're not in the low code domain. You're in like that pro code or domain where you're working with Azure services and dealing with subscriptions and things like that. AI Builder opens up that model or makes that model available, but for low code, no code developers. So at this point of time, then you're not dealing with Azure subscription and APIs and things like that. You have like that no code, low code form factor. So you need to be enabled for that in your Power Platform environment. So I think Geeta has dropped that form, so you can use that form to request access to this model. We should be able to grant it.
Once I request for my tenant, because within the same Power Platform tenant, we have multiple environments like dev, test, prod.
Correct.
And also the developer environment. Some of the developers have created their own environment. Once I request at the tenant level, all the developers or all the environments will get it, or I need to do it per environment?
So good question. We're not doing it at tenant level because again, enabling at a tenant level can be disruptive for a lot of customers. So we are enabling it only at an environment level. So I would request to pick up some kind of a dev environment where you want access for the people that are there, and use the org ID, because the model is dependent on the CDS environment. So you need to have a database in your environment. So if you have that org ID, put that in the form and we should be able to give you access.
Sure, I'll fill out the form right after the call. Yeah, thanks for the info, and you can continue with the presentation.
Yeah, absolutely. Good question. Thank you. So again, this is very simple. Flow here. I have a manual trigger. I can actually get rid of this and show you how to add it, right? Once you have access. Again, this is just a manual trigger. It can be any trigger, right? It can be Outlook or Teams or whatever trigger you want, right? Remember, we are always working with text. So again, any text output is good game. In this case, you want to create text with GPT on Azure OpenAI service. This is the model that gives you the power of the GPT model. So we bring it here. It's asking you for an instruction and giving you all this text. So remember, this is an AI generated content, all of that, right? There's a magic button here, which is create instruction. It has these sparkles. I love them. When you click on this, it opens the same prompt engineering interface, but within Power Automate. So you don't have to go to Explore to do your experimentation anyways. But again, obviously, if you've done your experimentation, you can bring it here, right? So you can start from scratch or use one of our templates, or you click more examples and share more examples with you. So we can start just here, right, to experiment. So for example, in this case, what are we doing in this one? Maybe not this one. Let me, because extract action points, we've already done this one. Oh, classify text. Let's do this. So in this case, we are giving it an article, or we're saying, hey, here is the given text, and I want you to classify that as sports, technology, political, life science, and unknown, right? So if I give it a bunch of text, it will classify it, right? So I want to use actually a different example, extract information from text. So this is a good one. So this is extracting container numbers and registration from an email that I have given it, right? And when I hit it, it will start to extract some container numbers and registration numbers, which is great. And I love it because it is helpful. It is helping me think through this. But I can come back and say, hey, I want it a little bit more structured. So I can change the instruction a little bit and say, hey, give me the same information, but as rows and columns. So and I'll test that and start to produce an output. Now you see, just with the change of the text, and all I added was as individual rows, right? And I told him, hey, what information I need? I need size, container number, and registration. So started to produce this as a row column kind of thing, comma separated row column. So this is great. I can spit this out as a CSV file, and I can work off that in some downstream process, and that's great. I can also come back and say, hey, give me the same thing, but just make this as a JSON, right? So in this case, I will add another piece of instruction to it and try to change the format, and it should start to produce a JSON for me, right? So I can copy this. I can say, hey, use this instruction in my flow. It comes and gives me that text back. I can remove this. Oops. End of text. Sorry. What I want to do is I want to select this and give it the text that I have above, which is the email. Right? So this is my email that is coming along. Again, we are assuming this is an email. It could be any text, right? And you can have an Outlook Connect, and thereby you're bringing an email. And I'll show you an example of that as well. So my instruction is not succinct because I've tested it. It'll extract the rows and columns and give a JSON output, right? And then what I'm doing is I'm parsing that content by giving it the structure that I had, and then giving it the content that I have that is coming out of the model, which is the text output, text response, right? Using this, now I can parse all the orders that are coming in, which have the specific information. I can create a workflow for myself. Right, so let me save this and then come back. We could actually also test it. Maybe let's see. I can test it once it saves. Okay, so it says this is warning. I'll talk about this warning a little bit. Let me test this with some text that we can give to it. So it's the same email that we had earlier. Let me give it the test interface, and it should run the flow. let's say it's running the flow. Hopefully it runs that. So it runs the flow. It takes whatever was coming, it produces this JSON, and it then parses this JSON. And we can see it's extracting the size, the container number, the registration, right? And now I can take this output and then drop it into a Dataverse table or do whatever with it, right? Something like that. Let's take another example and then I'll pause for questions. So for example, we talked about email, right? So let's say we have an Outlook connector and then there is an incoming email. And this is where I want to talk about the warning as well. Again, Outlook connector scans for incoming email, extracts the right information, in this case, order number, customer name, issue summary, and then takes the body, and then sends it in a team channel, right? So let's execute just this for now. Let me send it an email. I had pre-crafted an email that I wanted to send, so I will send it. It should start to execute. I should receive a new email. There it runs. Hopefully that works. So error. What happened here? Okay. Operation error, invalid prediction, ML input. Error during call to. Okay, I'll have to check this out. Oh, the email is just too long. It's the model's maximum token length is, so I requested for a longer email, so maybe that is causing that issue, right? So remember, the model has a finite set of tokens, which is 4097, and then my email size was bigger. So what we would want to do is, in this scenario, we would want to probably add another step of first of all, what we are doing here is we're taking the email body as it is and then sending it to the model. So I can strip off some of the HTML content to text content that will again reduce my size of my email. So instead of sending it the entire thing, I'm sending it, let's say body, and instead of body here, I will say plain text, right? So that should make it a little bit easy to work with the, oops, sorry, I want to put it here. So that'll strip off all the extra HTML content, will bring only the text, or will cut down my token numbers. So that way I can preserve some token numbers. I wanted to quickly also talk about the flow checker warning, because that's super important, and then I'll stop for question. I feel we are over time. So this warning talks about a very important thing, which is, hey, if you're generating AI content, and then if you are sending it to customers or leadership or larger group of people, or doing something which is high value after that, right? Always use human inspection as a step. Again, this is a warning. It's not kind of blocking you from anything, right? So what we want to do generally is, if I'm taking this order number, and let's say we were just putting it in Teams, and that's okay, it's benign. But if I was adding it to a Dataverse table, or most importantly, if I'm sending something to customers, I want to review, I want human agency over it, right? So in that scenario, what I would want to do is I want to add an approval step, right? So right, so I want to bring in a start and wait kind of a step here, right, which will say, hey, what kind of approval you need, and I'm going to pick, for example, approve or reject the response, right, and then I'll specify who, just title AI generated content or AI generated or record, or whatever you want to say, right? You want to identify who has the agency to approve it, and then in the details you want to capture the AI generated text, right? Now what will happen is when you run the flow, it'll execute everything. In this step, it'll stop and pause, and it'll wait for a human inspection, a human overview, a human foresight or oversight on it, right? And when you're comfortable with what human has generated or what the model has generated, then you can say, hey, I approve or reject this, and then it can take the rest of the actions, right? So that's how we implement human inspection or human review in the flow. So I'll save this at this point. Sorry, okay. I needed to provide some email. So again, I can drop in an email address and it'll do that. So I know we're out of time. We have 10 minutes. I want to pause and see if people have questions. I can answer any questions for them.
Yeah, Ashish, thank you so much for taking the time to share all of this information. It's quite fascinating to see how much you can, get achieved if you have your prompting and instructions right, being able to use all of this technology. And I loved how you had the whole your slide speaking about the different components that you need to keep in mind when you're coming up with your prompts. I mean, it only speaks to like if you're it's almost like talking to this natural language processor, and then if you give it very generic instructions, then your responses are going to be generic as well. But the more specific you are, the more you're able to bake in contextual information, the more detailed those results are. Now, with all, we know that it's really dependent on the data that it's been processed on or it's been trained on. With all of this capability available in the platform, there's going to be scenarios where the responses are not as expected, or the results that we're seeing are not what we'd originally expected. I mean, is there going to be a way for us to provide feedback in a secure way, maybe share parts of the data to tell that, this is the response that was expected, or this is not what I was expected, just to, or a way for us to help fine tune that, fine tune the model behind the scenes?
Right. So very good question. Remember, we're working, and that's why I mentioned earlier, I think this hybrid kind of sense of the model, that you don't change the model. What you have control over or agency over is the prompt, right? So in the kind of previous paradigm of how we worked with AI model was you give it an input, it produces the output, and if you see it's steering away, maybe because the data has drifted or model has decayed over time, you collect all of that, all those anomalies of the model, right? Or you collect all those failure cases of the model, and then you create another improvement data set, and you go back and retrain the model, and does improve the model, and hopefully it kind of works well with all those gaps that it had, right? So that was the paradigm that we were in. In the new paradigm, I feel what you would want to be doing in scenarios where you see gaps, you want to come back and change your prompt. You want to improve your prompt, right? There's maybe a context that's missing. There's probably another token that you can add, right? Remember that example where we were trying to see, hey, can it produce me the output where it says sentiment colon whatever output, and it's not producing that right now. So you want to come back and tweak your prompt, play with the prompt, and get to a place where it can actually start to produce sentiment colon that output, right? And thereby you change the outcome, right? So you're not fine tuning the model, you're changing the prompt, I feel, in this case.
Can you bring up your slides again?
Sure, absolutely. So
and go to the one that had the common use cases.
Yes, absolutely.
And just from my understanding, so when we're talking specifically today, we're talking about the OpenAI, Azure OpenAI service and model.
Sure.
And so, Geetha, just following up on your question, I mean, that model is trained on data, large sets of data that's outside of your organization.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're building a solution using that specific model, like these examples here, sentiment analysis, text classification, or well, start sentiment analysis, right? You're looking at data that typically is outside of your organization. If you wanted to do something with
the model is outside your organization, not the data, right? Data is with your organization.
Yeah, the model's outside your organization. So if you're wanting it to limit its purview to just specific things in your organization, in the design, as a no-code builder. How would you be doing that and then being able to take advantage of this model?
So let me try to understand the question, right? You're saying you want to limit the model to data within your organization. You don't want it to use the knowledge of the world or the internet to be able to.
Well, that's the thing. I was like, when is best to use this model as opposed to maybe something else in the AI Builder Power Automate world of models? So, you want to provide a nice, easy text-based way maybe to ask questions of your policies and procedures for your employees. OpenAI model, not the best one to use for this. Other models would be best, or that's kind of like my overriding question is, when does it make sense to use the OpenAI one?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So there will be multiple factors, right? I mean, it depends upon the scenario. So for example, if you see, we have something called sentiment analysis model already in AI Builder. If your task is just that, you're doing nothing else but sentiment analysis, they would not be a reason to, I would say, use OpenAI model. It'll be expensive, slower, and you have a specific purpose model to do that task. So I would say use that. But if you were doing something like, hey, I want to extract the sentiment and I also want to summarize whatever is coming in, right? So maybe you have a review coming in. So you want to summarize that review and you want to take the most impactful thing from that kind of product review or whatever and have that. In that scenario, I would say use OpenAI model, because otherwise you might be using two AI builder models. And again, that might be okay too, right? So you might be using sentiment analysis and then some kind of a summarization model to summarize it, right? So either you might want to use those two specific models for that task or use AI builder in that case, right? So it will depend on what scenario you are trying to light up. Just the fact that this is untethered is not the right word. It is general purpose. You have a lot more flexibility because every scenario that you see here, there is not an AI builder model that can do it, right? So we don't provide a summarization model, AI model right now. We have an extraction model, and content generation is not there, right? So specifically for, it's no brainer for those cases, right, where you don't find a corresponding specific model. In that case, obviously use OpenAI. But if you have like something like classification, where there's a classifier model and there is OpenAI model, which one you want to pick, right? If you have data set that you can bring in to train the classifier is going to be faster, cheaper to use, because again, it's a specific model. It's just built for the purpose of classification. Much smaller model, right? And hence much cheaper to kind of execute as well. And if that works, great, and you have that competency to craft the data set to train that model, go do that, right? If you don't have that and you want to just prompt the model and use the intelligence of the model to create this classification just by telling, here are the 5 classes that I want you to classify my incoming email or whatever, then OpenAI would be the way to go.
Okay.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it gave me a good, kind of general direction, which is what I was kind of curious in. The other one is even specific to this summarization use case. And just kind of getting a little bit more tactical of how to use it. Example would be you're performing a lot of research and you have reports that you're having to make sense of to then come up with your, recommendation, right, to move forward on something. And so to be able to use this model, specifically, would you put those reports like in a SharePoint library as an example? And then use that model off of the files that are in that library, because you had mentioned, summarizing things. I've been doing that with Bing through the browser, the Edge browser.
Yes.
And so this type of model here with AI Builder and summarizing maybe multiple reports, how do you execute on that one?
Yeah, I mean, those are all kind of good ideas, like dropping the article in a SharePoint and listening to a SharePoint kind of update, and you pick the updated kind of file and extract the text and do that. You can also think of, hey, here are the RSS feeds that I want to keep track of, or all the news articles or news things that keep track of. And then as soon as you pull something from that feed, hey, I want a summarization on top of it, and give me a newsletter of sorts, right? End of my day or end of my weekend, so that I can have a reading kind of thing for my weekend or whatever, right? So yes, absolutely, you can build stuff like that.
Okay, because the reason I was asking that was getting around the limitation of the prompt limit.
Oh. So yes, good point, right? That you will run into scenarios where the article is too long or the document is too long, right? You could break stuff down, right? As a PDF, you can chunk it a little bit, I feel.
Yep.
But I feel, remember I mentioned, right, that the progression of the model is just so fast.
Yeah, imagine that'll be coming shortly.
Some point of time, you're working with, like, GPT-4 already allows you a 32K window, which is, you can stuff in like 100 pages of text in it.
Yeah.
Approximately. So that will change soon, right? Sure, the current model might not get you there, but you will soon get there.
And lastly, this OpenAI Azure model. So what kind of, I thought it was running on like GPT-4. It was taking advantage of that technology. Is that incorrect?
This is not taking advantage of GPT-4 right now. This is
Okay.
using a 3.5 model.
Okay.
So there are a bunch of things, right, that we need to do before we kind of bring it for low-code, no-code usage.
Yep.
Let me try to think how I want to frame that. So there is availability of model is just one dimension, right? How widely is that model available? How vetted out that model is, right? What is the security kind of guardrails that we need to bring in? So anytime OpenAI releases something, again, Azure OpenAI is on a very fast clip. The moment you see GPT-4 landed in a few days time, I feel Azure OpenAI announced availability of the model in private preview. So they because they're obviously working very close, they're on a very fast clip. They're working in tandem in that sense. But for that model to become available to no-code, low-code users, there's a lot of security and reliability and responsible AI stuff that we need to build on top, right? So if you're using something from OpenAI directly, it's vastly different when you use it from Azure, because we need to give you the Azure reliance on top of it, right? All the security, privacy, compliances on top of it. So that's one dimension. Also, your data is not shared with OpenAI. Your data stays within Microsoft boundaries, your tenant, and things like that. We're also building a lot of content moderation on top of it, right? All the good learnings from Bing and other places that are kind of brought in. So there's a lot of engineering that happens under the hood to bring a specific model just in Azure OpenAI, and then another set of things to bring it in AI Builder, right? But again, I think we're working in that in within those constraints, right, and trying to bring things as fast as possible. So you will see things move in that direction as well, where we can bring the latest models much faster. Biggest thing is just availability of the compute and availability of the model, such that we can serve a large swath of people. The pro developers that are working on top of GPT-4 versus all the low code, no code citizen developers that might work on that. The scale is very different, I feel. So when we bring it for that audience, you want to be able to serve all of them, right? So that scale needs to be built out, I feel. So those are
very helpful. Yep, thank you.
I did have a question on, I mean, if you can provide some insights on how is the cost for licensing going to work when you use AI Builder with the Azure OpenAI based models? I mean, is that something that you have some information that you could, what do we need to look for from a licensing and cost perspective?
I feel that is just super simple in the sense the customers of the users of AI Builder are very familiar with AI credits and how do we use credits for different models, and each model has a different burn rate, and that's how, I mean, so the currency of payment is your AI credits, and based on the model that you're using, either you're using a documentation model, you're paying by pages, or you are doing translation, you're paying by translation or whatever, right? So there'll be a different burn rate for this model, and will probably be a token-based burn rate, because that's again going to become a common way people interact with large language models, and will become very comfortable talking about tokens and things like that. So it'll be token-based kind of burn rate, and it'll show up in your AI Builder rate card, just like any other model, right? So a new line item with a new burn rate, and you pay through your AI Builder credit. So if you have AI Builder add-ons into your subscription or your environment, you can assign it to a given environment that, hey, X amount of credits to this, and you can just pay by your AI Builder credits. In that sense, that becomes your currency of exchange.
Got it. Thank you. Anyone have any other questions, or feel free to unmute and go for it. All right, if we don't have any questions, well, as always, we thank everyone for taking their time to join us and support the user group. And we hope to see you guys again next month. And we've been meeting on a monthly basis, been virtual for so long, but thank you, everyone. And thank you, Ashish, for taking the time off of your evening to come and share all of the good information on generative AI with the group here.
You're welcome. Thanks for the invite. Pleasure talking to you all.
Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.